You ever wonder what a single day's headlines can really tell you about a country? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out. We're going to look at 4 stories from January 2nd that seem totally unrelated, but by the end, we'll piece them together to get this amazing, complex picture of modern India from ancient traditions all the way to the global economy.
So, here's where we're headed. We're going to kick things off with a beautiful cultural celebration right at the edge of the country. Then, we'll dive into an ecological mystery that was solved using ancient literature. How cool is that? After that, we'll look at a quiet diplomatic tradition between rivals. And finally, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of global trade pressures. Each story is like its own little thread, and we're going to see how they weave together.
Okay, so our first stop takes us to the far, far eastern edge of India. This is a place where the day doesn't just start with the sun, it starts with a celebration of light, of nature, and of traditions that go way back.
We're starting in a place called Dang, and this village has a pretty unique claim to fame. It's the easternmost inhabited place in all of India. What that means is the people living there are the very first ones in the entire country to see the sun every single morning.
But you know, the Sunrise Festival in Dang is so much more than just a beautiful view. It's this incredibly vibrant cultural event. The local Mayor and Mishmi communities come together to perform the Alo Prabhat, which translates to the Dance of the Dawn. It's this powerful performance that really honors their deep connection to the natural world and their indigenous heritage.
So when you get right down to it, this isn't just some local festival. It's a really profound symbol of that bond between culture and nature. And it's all happening at the very spot where the entire nation's day begins.
All right, now we're going to switch gears completely. We're moving from culture to science, where a discovery that was literally hidden in ancient literature is forcing experts to rethink an entire ecosystem. So for years, the accepted scientific belief was that the savannas in western Maharashtra were just forests that had been damaged or degraded over time. But startling new evidence has completely flipped that idea on its head. It turns out they are actually ancient, natural ecosystems all on their own.
And the key to this whole thing? It came from a single word, vana. For centuries, people just assumed it meant forest. But by going back and re-examining medieval Marathi texts, researchers discovered it actually described these vast, open landscapes with trees and grass. In other words, a savanna.
You see, these old texts paint a super clear picture of an ecosystem that's been around for at least 750 years, one that's naturally adapted to things like fire and grazing animals. And here's the real kicker. Of all the plants mentioned in those texts, only 3 were true forest species. This was never a dense forest to begin with.
And this isn't just some academic debate, This has huge, real-world consequences. Current environmental policies have been basically operating under the wrong assumption, trying to fix these savannas by turning them into forests. This discovery means that entire conservation strategy needs a serious reevaluation to protect these unique landscapes for what they really are.
From the natural world, we're now jumping into the, well, let's say tense and complex arena of geopolitics. We're looking at a quiet but incredibly important tradition that happens between 2 nuclear-armed neighbors, India and Pakistan.
So let's rewind a bit to 1988. The 2 countries signed an agreement with a very clear purpose, to make sure they'd never attack each other's nuclear facilities. And as part of that deal, every single year they exchange a detailed list of these sites. It's what's called a confidence-building measure. It's all about reducing suspicion and preventing a catastrophic mistake.
But this annual exchange isn't just about military hardware. It's also become a crucial moment for a very human issue. The 2 nations also use this time to share lists of civilian prisoners and fishermen that are being held in each other's jails.
199. In the most recent exchange, that was the number of Indian fishermen that Pakistan confirmed were being held in its custody. It's just a stark reminder of the human cost of the ongoing tensions between these 2 countries.
So what this really shows us is that even when political relations are basically frozen solid, this one single channel of communication stays open. It's a small but absolutely vital thread of cooperation in what is otherwise a very complex and often tense relationship.
All right, for our final story, we're moving from diplomacy to dollars and cents. We're diving into some fresh data on a really specialized part of India's exports, technical textiles. Think materials designed for function, not fashion. Stuff used in everything from medical supplies to construction.
Okay, so if we look at the data from April to October 2025, exports of these technical textiles hit about $1.95 billion.
Now that is a small dip of 1.2% year over year. But what's interesting is that because of currency fluctuations, it was actually a 2.3% growth in rupee terms. For the global picture, though, that dollar value tells the real story.
So where is all this stuff going? Well, the answer is pretty heavily weighted in one direction. The United States is the single biggest market, buying up more than a quarter of all technical textile exports. That's a pretty big concentration in just one country.
Okay, now this is where the story gets really interesting. Remember that tiny overall dip of just 1.2%? Well, that number is hiding the real issue. Because when you look specifically at exports to the US, they didn't just dip, they plummeted by a massive 15%. This one market is what's dragging the whole sector's numbers down.
And the diagnosis here is pretty clear. The main reason for this drop is US tariffs, which are just making these goods more expensive. This really highlights a key vulnerability. When you're this reliant on a single market, any policy change over there has a huge impact. The products getting hit the hardest include things like industrial bags, ropes, and even medical supplies like gauze and wipes.
So let's just pull back for a second. We've seen 4 really different snapshots from a single day. A cultural celebration at dawn, a scientific correction of the past, a persistent diplomatic ritual, and a telling dip in global trade. You put them all together, and they form this kind of mosaic of a nation that is ancient, modern, complex, and always in motion.
It just goes to show you that the full story of a nation isn't just in the major events, but in the little details of a single day. And it kind of leaves you wondering, right? What hidden connections and surprising stories are waiting for us in the headlines we'll all read tomorrow?